Imagine living for 37 years in a space smaller than a yoga mat, suspended 15 meters above the ground, exposed to all the elements of nature. For most of us, this seems impossible, even insane. But for a man who lived more than 1,500 years ago, this choice transformed him into one of the most extraordinary figures in history. Chapter 1. The Life of Saint Simeon. In the ancient lands of Cilicia, where modern-day Turkey now stands, one of the most extraordinary figures in Christian history was born. It was the year 390, and no one could have imagined that this boy, the son of humble shepherds, would become a living legend. Amid the flocks and pastures, young Simeon developed a spiritual connection that intrigued everyone around him. His search for God was so intense that at the age of 16, he made a decision that would change not only his life, but also the history of Christianity forever. Upon joining a local monastery, Simeon quickly stood out for his extreme ascetic practices. While other monks fasted occasionally, he went days without eating, developing a physical endurance that would later become fundamental in his journey. What few know is that during his early years at the monastery, Simeon would often give his own portion of food to the needy, preferring to subsist on wild herbs he found around the monastery grounds. For those looking to dive deeper into the inspiring stories of saints like Simeon and learn about their powerful intercessory prayers, I recommend our ebook, 50 Saints, Stories and Prayers for Divine Intervention, available in our online store. Check the links below. The intensity of his devotion soon began to draw attention, not always in a positive way. His superiors, concerned with his extreme practices of mortification, questioned whether he was going too far. But Simeon felt that his spiritual journey was only just beginning, and that an even more radical calling awaited him. This quest for a deeper connection with the divine would lead Simeon to make a decision that would leave the medieval world in awe. Chapter 2. The Radical Decision to Live on a Column. Dissatisfied with conventional monastic life, Simeon sought a unique path of devotion. During a night of intense prayer, he had a vision that would change his life. An angel, radiant as the sun, descended from the heavens in a column of light and called him to rise above earthly concerns. The inspiration to live on a column came from an ancient tradition of desert prophets who believed that physical elevation brought the devotee closer to the heavenly realms. For Simeon, the column represented Jacob's ladder, a literal connection between heaven and earth. A fascinating yet little-known detail is that his first column was only 2 meters high. He decided to increase its height after realizing that people began to constantly touch him in search of blessings, which interfered with his pursuit of absolute contemplation. At the top of his final and most famous column, an impressive 15 meters tall, Simeon lived on a platform of just 50 square centimeters. Pilgrims frequently asked how he managed to sleep in such a small space, to which he would reply, "Angels do not need to lie down to rest." To survive the extreme conditions, he developed extraordinary techniques. During storms, he tied himself to the column with ropes made of palm fibers, and during periods of intense heat, he entered a deep state of meditation, a practice he learned from monks traveling from the East. A rare manuscript discovered in Antioch reveals that Simeon chose the location for his column after observing that it was a point where 2 winds met, creating an air current that, according to him, carried prayers directly to heaven. The news of a man living between heaven and earth soon spread throughout the Roman Empire. Before long, his solitary column would become the stage for inexplicable events that would draw crowds from all corners of the known world. Chapter 3. The Fame and Miracles of Saint Simeon. What began as a quest for solitude transformed into one of the most extraordinary phenomena of early Christianity. Entire caravans crossed deserts just to catch a glimpse of the man who lived between heaven and earth, turning the region into a true center of pilgrimage. Among the countless miracles attributed to Simeon, one of the most intriguing occurred during a devastating drought. The city of Afsai was being decimated by a plague of rats that destroyed all the crops. After hearing the pleas of the residents, Simeon instructed them to mark their homes with crosses made of ashes. Within 3 days, all the rats inexplicably disappeared. During a rigorous 40-day fast, a remarkable event was recorded by Abbot Bassus. Upon visiting Simeon, he found the bread and water he had left completely untouched, a sign interpreted as divine provision, as the saint survived without consuming any food. One of the most surprising accounts involved an Arabian queen who sought Simeon's intercession against a corrupt minister oppressing widows and orphans. After Simeon sent a message of warning to the tyrant, the man was struck by a mysterious illness that only ceased when he returned everything he had stolen. Perhaps the most spectacular of his miracles was the spring that emerged at the foot of the column. When Emperor Theodosius sent bishops to convince him to come down, Simeon responded with a prayer. Suddenly, crystal clear water began to gush from the barren ground, a spring that, according to accounts of the time, never ran dry. Among the pilgrims who sought his blessing were people from all social classes and religions. Ancient documents report that even Zoroastrian priests from Persia made the long journey to consult the sage of the column, recognizing in him a special connection to the divine. But it wasn't just miracles that drew the crowds. From the top of his column, Simeon was about to become one of the most powerful and influential voices of his time. Chapter 4. A Message of Justice and Faith. From the top of his column, Simeon became a voice that could not be ignored. What few know is that he maintained extensive correspondence with emperors and authorities, using his influence to defend the oppressed. His letters, some of which have survived to this day, reveal a man of surprising eloquence and political wisdom. In a time when Christianity still struggled against paganism, Simeon developed a unique method of conversion. Rather than condemning ancient practices, he engaged in dialogue with pagan priests, building bridges between different traditions. Records indicate that entire tribes of Bedouins converted after witnessing his life of devotion. A notable episode occurred when Emperor Theodosius II planned to raise taxes during a severe crisis. Through a powerful letter, Simeon warned that such a measure would harm the poorest. The emperor not only abandoned the tax increase, but also sent shipments of grain to the most affected regions. His sermons attracted crowds so large that 4 basilicas were constructed around the column, forming a perfect cross. An ingenious system of staircases and platforms allowed pilgrims to approach and listen to his teachings, turning the site into a true university of the desert. Historians have discovered that Simeon created a code of signals to communicate with the crowds when his voice could not reach everyone present. Specific movements of his hands conveyed messages of blessing, healing, or penance, a system so effective that it was adopted by other Stylites. His influence extended far beyond religion. He mediated commercial disputes, advised on planting and harvesting, and even provided guidance on medical issues. A surprising record mentions that he managed to prevent a war between rival tribes with just a brief message sent to their leaders. The voice that echoed from the top of that column was about to fall silent, but the impact of his words and actions would continue to reverberate through the centuries. Chapter 5. The Legacy of Saint Simeon. On the morning of September 2nd, 459, an extraordinary scene unfolded in the Syrian desert. Simeon, who had not been seen moving for 3 days, was found in a position of prayer, his body bowed in final reverence. News of his death spread like wildfire across the empire, sparking an unprecedented dispute over his relics. A little-known curiosity is that 2 imperial cities, Antioch and Constantinople, mobilized entire armies to claim his body. The dispute was only resolved when a dream revealed to the patriarch that the saint wished to remain near his sacred column. The architectural complex built in his honor, known as Saint Simeon, became a masterpiece of Byzantine architecture. With 4 basilicas arranged in the shape of a cross and the original column preserved at the center, the site attracted pilgrims for more than 1,000 years and is now considered a UNESCO World Heritage Site. His life inspired a unique movement in Christian history, the Stylites. For centuries, from Syria to medieval Russia, hundreds of devotees followed his example, living atop columns. The last known Stylite lived in Georgia until 1991, keeping alive a tradition of more than 1,500 years. Simeon's influence transcended Christianity. Recently discovered manuscripts reveal that Sufi mystics and Hindu ascetics adapted some of his meditation and contemplation practices. His technique of continuous prayer, in particular, resonated across spiritual traditions worldwide. A fascinating detail is that recent archaeological excavations at the base of his column uncovered thousands of small terracotta medals bearing his image. These were the first religious souvenirs in history, distributed to pilgrims as mementos of their visit to the saint. But what drives a man to choose a life of such sacrifice? The answer to this question challenges our modern understanding of faith and devotion. As we gaze at the ruins of Saint Simeon at sunset, it is impossible not to reflect on the extraordinary legacy of Saint Simeon. In a world increasingly connected digitally, yet paradoxically isolated, his radical quest for meaning echoes with surprising relevance. His story challenges us to ask, how far would we go for what we believe? In an age of comfort and convenience, Simeon reminds us that the greatest transformations often require the greatest sacrifices. If you were inspired by this extraordinary story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Next week, we'll bring another fascinating story about people who changed the world through their unshakable faith.